chapter and the first verse. Call the wild animals. Son of man, prophesy against Gog. Say a message of God, the master. I'm against you, Gog, head of Meshach and Tubal. I'm going to turn you around and drag you out from the far north and down on the mountains of Israel. Then I'll knock your bow out of your left hand and your arrows from your right hand. On the mountains of Israel, you'll be slaughtered, you and all your troops and the people with you. I'll serve you up as a meal to carrion birds and scavenging animals. You'll be killed in the open field. I've given my word, decree of God, the master. I'll set fire to Magog and the far off islands where people are so seemingly secure and they realize that I'm God. I'll reveal my holy name among the people of Israel. Never again will I let my holy name be dragged in the mud. Then the nations will realize that I, God, am the Holy One in Israel. It's coming. Yes, it will happen. This is the day I've been telling you about. People will come from the cities of Israel and make a huge bonfire of weapons of war, piling on shields large and small, bows and arrows, clubs and spears. A fire they're going to keep going for 7 years. They won't need to go into the woods to get fuel for fire. There'll be plenty of weapons to keep it going. They'll strip those who strip them. They'll rob those who rob them, decree of God, the master. At that time, I'll set a burial ground for Gog in Israel at Travelers' Rest, just east of the sea. I'll obstruct the route of the travelers, blocking their way. The mass grave of Gog and the mob of an army, they'll call the place Gog's mob. I'll bury the corpses in order to clean up the land. It'll take them 7 months. All the people will turn out to help with burials. It will be a big day for the people when it's all done, and I'm giving my due. Men will be hired full-time for the cleanup burial operation and will go through the country looking for defiling, decomposing corpses. At the end of 7 months, there'll be an all-out final search. Anyone who sees a bone will mark the place with a stick so the buriers can get it and bury it in the mass burial site. Gog's mob, a town nearby called Mobville or Hamona. That's how they'll clean up the land. Son of man, God the master says, call the birds, call the wild animals, call out, gather and come, gather around my sacrificial meal that I'm preparing for you on the mountains of Israel. You'll eat meat and drink blood. You'll eat the bodies of great heroes and drink the blood of famous princes, as if there were so many rams and lambs and goats and bulls, the choicest grain-fed animals of Bashan, at the sacrificial meal I'm fixing for you. You'll eat fat till you're stuffed and drink blood till you're drunk at the table I set for you. You'll stuff yourselves with horses and riders, heroes and fighters of every kind, decree of God the master. I'll put my glory on display among the nations, and they'll see the judgment I execute. See me at work handing out judgment. From that day on, Israel will realize that I am their God, and the nations will get the message that it was because of their sins that Israel went into exile. They were disloyal to me, and I turned away from them. I turned them over to their enemies, and they were all killed. I treated them as their polluted and sin-sated lives deserved. I turned away from them and refused to look at them. But now I will return Jacob back from exile. I'll be compassionate with all the people of Israel, and I'll be zealous for my holy name. Ooh, thank God for Jesus, because this is really overwhelming. Jesus paid it all, so we don't have to deal with this. Thank God for Jesus. My God, this makes me more thankful for Jesus. Hallelujah. Eventually, the memory will fade, the memory of their shame over their betrayals of me when they live securely in their own land, safe and unafraid. Once I brought them back from foreign parts, gathered them in from their enemy territories, I'll use them to demonstrate my holiness with all the nations watching. Then they'll realize for sure that I am their God. For even though I sent them off into exile, I'll gather them back to their own land, leaving not one soul behind. After I poured out my spirit on Israel, fill them with life, I'll no longer turn away. I'll look in them full face, decree of God the master. But see, in the New Testament, if you confess your sins, he's faithful and just to forgive you. You don't have to deal with all of this. Ezekiel 40, measuring the temple complex. In the 25th year of our exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th of the month, it was the 14th year after the city fell, God touched me and brought me here. He brought me in divine vision to the land of Israel and set me down on a high mountain. To the south, there were buildings that looked like a city. He took me there, and I met a man deeply tanned like bronze. He stood at the entrance holding the linen cord and a measuring stick. Deeply tanned sounds black to me. The man said to me, son of man, look and listen carefully. Pay close attention to everything I'm going to show you. That's why you've been brought here, and then tell Israel everything you see. First, I saw a wall around the outside of the temple complex. The measuring stick in the man's hand was about 10 feet long. He measured the thickness of the wall, about 10 feet. The height was also about 10 feet. He went into the gate complex that faced the east and went up the 7 steps. He measured the depth of the outside threshold of the gate complex, 10 feet. There were alcoves flanking the gate corridor, each 10 feet square, each separated by a wall 7.5 feet thick. The inside threshold of the gate complex that led to the porch facing into the temple courtyard was 10 feet deep. He measured the inside porch of the gate complex, 12 feet deep, flanked by pillars 3 feet thick. The porch opened onto the temple courtyard. Inside this east gate complex, there were 3 alcoves on each side. Each room was the same size, and the separating walls were identical. He measured the outside entrance of the gate complex, 15 feet wide and 19.5 feet deep. In front of each alcove was a low wall 18 inches high. The alcoves were 10 feet square. He measured the width of the gate complex from the outside edge of the alcove roof on one side to the outside edge of the alcove roof on the other, 37.5 feet from one top edge to the other. He measured the inside walls of the gate complex, 90 feet to the porch leading into the courtyard. The distance from the entrance to the gate complex to the far end of the porch was 75 feet. The alcoves and their connecting walls inside the gate complex were topped by narrow windows all the way around. The porch also, all the windows face inward. The door jambs between the alcoves were decorated with palm trees. The man then led me to the outside courtyard with all its rooms. A paved walkway had been built connecting the courtyard gates. 30 rooms lined the courtyard. The walkway was the same length as the gateways. It flanked them and ran their entire length. This was the walkway for the outside courtyard. He measured the distance from the front entrance gateway across to the entrance of the inner court, 150 feet. Then he took me to the north side. Here was another gate complex facing north. Exiting the outside courtyard, he measured its length and width. It had 3 alcoves on each side. Its gate posts and porch were the same as in the first gate, 87.5 feet by 43.75 feet. The windows and palm trees were identical to the east gateway. 7 steps led up to it, and its porch faced inward. Outside this gate complex was a gate complex to the inside courtyard. On the north as on the east, the distance between the two was 175 feet. Then he took me to the south side, to the south gate complex. He measured its gates posts and its porch. It was the same size as the others. The porch with its windows was the same size as those previously mentioned. It also had 7 steps up to it. Its porch opened onto the outside courtyard with palm trees decorating its gate posts on both sides. Opposite to it, the gate complex for the inner court faced south. He measured the distance across the courtyard from gate to gate, 175 feet. He led me into the inside courtyard through the south gate complex. He measured it and found it the same as the outside ones. Its alcoves, connecting walls, and vestibule were the same. The gate complex and porch, windowed all around, measured 87.5 by 43.75 feet. The vestibule of each of the gate complexes leading to the inside courtyard was 43.75 by 8.75 feet. Each vestibule faced the outside courtyard. Palm trees were carved on its doorposts. 8 steps led up to it. Then he took me to the inside courtyard on the east and measured the gate complex. Hopefully everybody's remembering everything that's being stated, all these measurements. It was identical to the others. Alcoves, connecting walls, and vestibule all the same. The gate complex and vestibule had windows all around it, measured 87.5 by 43.75 feet. Its porch faced the outside courtyard. There were palm trees on the doorposts on both sides and had 8 steps. He brought me to the gate complex to the north and measured it, same measurements. The alcoves connecting the walls, a vestibule with its windows, 87.5 by 43.75 feet. Its porch faced the outside courtyard. There were palm trees on its doorposts on both sides, and it had 8 steps. There was a room with a door at the vestibule of the gate complex where the burnt offerings were cleaned. 2 tables were placed within the vestibule, one on either side, on which the animals for burnt offerings, sin offerings, and guilt offerings were slaughtered. 2 tables were also placed against both outside walls of the vestibules. 4 tables inside and 4 tables outside, 8 tables in all for slaughtering the sacrificial animals. The 4 tables used for the burnt offerings were 31.5 inches square and 21 inches high. The tools for slaughtering the sacrificial animals and other sacrifices were kept there. Meat hooks, 3 inches long, were fastened to the walls. The tables were for the sacrificial animals. This is a very detailed vision that Ezekiel was having. Right where the inside gate complex opened onto the inside courtyard, there were 2 rooms, one at the north gate facing south and one at the south gate facing north. The man told me the room facing south is for the priests who are in charge of the temple. and the room facing north is for the priests who are in charge of the altar. These priests are the sons of Zadok, the only sons of Levi permitted to come near to God to serve him. He measured the inner courtyard, 175 feet square. The altar was in front of the temple. He led me to the porch of the temple and measured the gate posts of the porch, 8 3/4 feet high on both sides. The entrance to the gate complex was 21 feet wide, and its connecting walls were 4.5 feet thick. The vestibule itself was 35 feet wide and 21 feet deep. 10 steps led up to the porch. Columns flanked the gate posts. Ezekiel 41. He brought me into the temple itself and measured the doorposts on each side. Each was 10.5 feet thick. The entrance was 17.5 feet wide. The walls on each side were 8 3/4 feet thick. He also measured the temple sanctuary, 75 feet by 35 feet. He went further in and measured the doorposts at the entrance. Each was 3.5 feet thick. The entrance itself was 10.5 feet wide, and the entrance walls were 12 1/4 feet thick. He measured the inside sanctuary, 35 feet square, set at the end of the main sanctuary. He told me, "This is the Holy of Holies." He measured the wall, of the temple. It was 10.5 feet thick. The side rooms around the temple were 7 feet wide. There were 3 floors on each of these. There were 3 floors of these side rooms, 30 rooms on each of the 3 floors. There were supporting beams around the temple wall to hold up the side rooms, but they were freestanding, not attached to the wall itself. The side rooms around the temple became wider from first floor to second floor to third floor. A staircase went from the bottom floor through the middle and then to the top floor. I observed that the temple had a 10.5-foot thick raised base around it, which provided a foundation for the side rooms. The outside walls of the side rooms were 8 3/4 feet thick. The open area between the side rooms of the temple and priest rooms was 35-foot wide strip all around the temple. There were 2 entrances to the side rooms from the open area, one place on the north side, the other on the south. There were 8 3/4 feet of open space all around. The house that faced the temple courtyard to the west was 122.5 feet wide with 8 3/4 foot thick walls. The length of the wall and building was 157.5 feet. He measured the temple, 175 feet long. The temple courtyard and the house, including its walls, measured 175 feet. The breadth of the front of the temple and the open area to the east was 175 feet. He measured the length of the house facing the courtyard at the back of the temple, including the shelters on each side, 175 feet. The main sanctuary, the inner sanctuary, and the vestibule facing the courtyard were paneled with wood and had window frames and door frames in all 3 sections. From floor to windows, the walls were paneled. Above the outside entrance to the inner sanctuary and on the walls at regular intervals all around the inner sanctuary and the main sanctuary, angel cherubim palm trees were carved in alternating sequence. Each angel cherub had 2 faces, a human face toward the palm tree on the right and the face of a lion toward the palm tree on the left. They were carved around the entire temple. The cherubim palm tree motif was carved from floor to door height on the wall of the main sanctuary. The main sanctuary had a rectangular door frame. In front of the holy place was something that looked like an altar of wood, 5 1/4 feet high and 3.5 feet square. Its corners, base, and sides were of wood. The man said to me, "This is the table that stands before God." Both the main sanctuary and the holy place had double doors. Each door had 2 leaves, 2 hinged leaves for each door, one set swinging inward, the other set outward. The doors of the main sanctuary were carved with angel cherubim and palm trees. There was a canopy of wood in front of the vestibule outside. There were narrow windows alternating with carved palm trees on both sides of the porch. This is the word of